Excellent. Well, hello and welcome to the New Gig podcast. I'm your host, Glen Hodgson, and today we've got the delighted to have Matthew Coatney, product and technology executive, entrepreneur, speaker, and also award-winning author. And his latest book, The Human Cloud, is out now. Matthew, great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. It's great to be here. Appreciate you talking with me. It's great.
Absolute pleasure. Now, let's just go straight into it. I wanted to hear a little bit about your background and how you started in the platform economy.
Sure. Well, I'll say I'm a late entrant to the platform economy. Discovered it rather recently, but I've been in technology and business most of my career. Started as a software developer many years ago, more than I care to admit, and I spent most of my career either building software or building companies around software, really around improving decision making and AI and things of that nature. But I have just a passion for many things. So I often would dabble in side projects to keep my skills up as I was doing my day job. And that led me to a platform called Upwork. If you're familiar with that, obviously, the staffing and freelance platform. Did a couple of side projects there, ended up doing a ghostwriting and AI report for an up-and-coming author by the name of Matthew Coatney, who happens to be my co-author for the book. So we got working together and sort of did project after project. And then his famous last words were, would you like to co-write a book with me? It's almost done. And it was not quite. So about a year and a half, 2 years later, we were able to launch it.
Excellent. Well, that's fantastic. And, you know, we see the developments the whole time within the sector, what's going on. And of course, insights globally, what's happening in Europe. We're a little bit further behind what's going on in the United States. But it would be great to hear a little bit about from your perspective, how the technology is facilitating this revolution or evolution, depending on how you look at it, and the steps that are being taken at the moment.
Sure, absolutely. And you're right. I think it's more of an evolution. Freelancing or contracting, that's one of the oldest professions, right? Back before there were corporations, everybody was a freelancer. They were hanging up their shingle and they were doing whatever craft they had developed. And even as far back as, when I was first entering the workforce in the 90s, there were people that were going on their own. And so it's not uncommon, obviously. It was a fairly common practice, but what has changed is accessibility. Right. You were typically limited, right, as a freelancer or as a contractor by your network. The people you knew that tended to be fairly hyper-regional. You were focused on a specific skill set in a specific area, and it was hard to get the word out, right? You would advertise, do marketing, et cetera. What has transformed that in the last 10, 15 years, particularly here in the US, as you point out, is there as technology now, these platforms, and I mentioned one is Upwork, but there's a ton of them. There's Gigster, there's Fiverr, there's Paro, all of these different sites that break down the barriers of both locating talent and then engaging in that talent. And so each one of those systems or ecosystems starts to lower that barrier of entry, that friction, and that transaction cost, and that just makes it easier and easier. And I think on the flip side, right, and what we've seen, and I write about a lot in the book because I come from the land of corporate. I've spent most of my life in corporate America, and it's getting harder to find, keep, retain employees. Loyalty is tougher to come by these days, and the project experience, that project economy, is really what a lot of people look for. So they're going from role to role, looking for experiences as opposed to that lifelong one company kind of work until you retire mentality. So those two things are colliding, and we've seen that definitely ramp up in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, and it's a really big change as well. And I think that you've got a technology background, you've got skin in the game from a technology perspective, but it's kind of the technology is there, but it's kind of the mindset is something that needs to catch up from individuals, but also corporations as well, it seems.
Absolutely, yes, and that's one of the key findings that I found as I dug into it, is that there are really structural impediments for corporations to engage in with freelancers. That's everything from HR systems, regulations, taxes, privacy and security, really runs the gamut. And the trade-off costs, right? If you wanted to bring on a freelancer to work on a project for, let's say, half a week, half a week, 20 hours, just knock something out for you. In the US right now, that would probably take you 3 weeks of effort to bring on that person for half a week. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that we need to think more about. And I've been fortunate to meet, there are people both in industry as well as in technology that are working to solve that problem. But it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take governmental improvements and regulations, sort of progressive movement there to see really improvement here in the US. And I think that's the case probably globally as well.
Yeah. And it does seem to be that case as well. And at the end of the day, we're always going to follow the talent, and it's going to be the talent that's going to be needed as well. So the way it's looking certainly from a European perspective now, is that the regulation, the rules, and the guidelines are a long way behind, but we're already seeing that sort of top talent sort of moving more down this kind of route at the moment as well. So it's maybe a case of, the rules, regulations, and the corporations need to catch up, because they need the skills and the talent to be able to deliver the products, services, and solutions that they're looking for.
That's absolutely right. And I think what you'll find, and we've seen this as well, obviously there's a lot of focus in the US and probably globally as well on Silicon Valley, and to a lesser extent, New York City, right? So there's this mythology of having these two areas that are really driving all of the innovation, when the reality is vast majority of businesses are outside of those two. They're in the heartland of America, where I am.
Yeah.
And the cost of living is much, cost of living, standard of life, everything can be quite a bit better in the Midwest. So if you have, and we've seen this with COVID, right? If it doesn't matter where you are located anymore and you can work from anywhere, why would a developer, for instance, be in Silicon Valley if they're working from their apartment 80 hours a week and never getting outside? They're not benefiting from that network.
Yes, exactly.
So we're seeing talent start to move inland. We're also seeing inland corporations being able to access talent globally for the skill sets they need, to your point. And if the need is great enough, they will overcome, or in some cases just circumvent, all of those restrictions to get their job done. And they'll find ways to do it.
And this is an interesting point that you raised there, actually, Matthew, as well. The element of how COVID-19, of course, a tragic, terrible situation that has changed the world. But if we can look for a silver lining, if we can look for a bright spot here, is this kind of forced element that, distance, proximity doesn't matter in the same way, that people can actually work from home or wherever they want to do and deliver the same product and deliver the same value. And I think this is probably, something that we're seeing, this acceptance, which should be a benefit for the platform economy and freelancing, or freelancing 2.0.
Absolutely. And I've spent about half my career supporting law firms and lawyers. And if you can think of any industry, any profession that would be the last to work remotely, that was the law firm, right? FaceTime is critical. They had to switch literally overnight. We helped a number of our clients shift to complete work from home in the matter of a day or a weekend. And they're embracing it, and they're doing quite well at it now, and overall as a profession. So I think if that can be done, then certainly anybody can. And it will rubber band back, right? When we get through COVID and, hopefully, thankfully, things are progressing in that path, that we'll start seeing light at the end of the tunnel. Things will start to revert back, where you'll see more people back in offices, FaceTime, but it will not go back. I don't believe it won't rebound all the way back to where it was. It just won't. People have seen a different way of working. Yeah,
absolutely. And the technology is there. And with the mindset shift, this can open up whole new opportunities and new fields and ways of doing things as well. And you're probably a threat to the real estate and the office, the real estate guys.
Absolutely. I mean, especially if you think again in the legal profession, real estate is one of their most expensive costs, fixed costs, and they're all in top tier markets, top tier buildings, and so rethinking what that looks like, it will be critical. And I think that where we are heading and the kinds of roles, to your point, what I have found is working remotely, and I think this is true for freelancers as well as corporate employees. It is practical. You can be productive on certain kinds of tasks. The repetitive, sort of deep thought, research, right, those types of things, the tactical work, you can do quite well at. The hard part, and I think freelancers have experienced this longer than we corporate employees, it's really hard to do the strategic work, to build out your network, to think about how you're going to grow your business. Like that all requires a bit of that serendipitous interaction with other people. And that is really hard to do virtually. We've tried, and there's different tools and techniques to do that. But on the balance, I think that'll be the key when we go back to post-COVID, starting to interact with other people. It's going to be more on that. And we're going to be thinking about how we engage at a deeper level than we may have before. And that's another silver lining I'm seeing. It's sort of recasting our relationships and the way we think about getting out in the world. That's fantastic. And I think it's a really interesting point as well. And I think just for this whole sector as well, you know, if we look at, you do a Google search or you look in the media, there's this kind of idea that the platform economy, gig economy, whatever you like to call it, is kind of synonymous with low paid, dirty, dangerous, repetitive, boring work. And I think there's yourself and I who are sat here who see a very, very different world out of this as well. And that doesn't really sort of feature in the headlines, doesn't really get a lot of coverage, unfortunately. That you are correct. And it's something we try to combat a bit in the book, where there is this bifurcation, and we are concerned about it, right? There is a risk when you start monetizing people's livelihoods in this kind of way, that it can be a race to the bottom. It's an opportunity to, strip people of basic workers' rights, healthcare, unions, things of that nature, because everybody becomes these transactional bots. But you're right that there is this flip side, and what we try to promote is the notion that it's the high quality work is where anybody wants to be, right? If I'm advising recent college graduates or children, like, you want to be where the high value work is. And that can mean something very different for different people, but it's moving up that stack. And that's always been the case. It's even more important now in freelance, because you can't hide behind your relationships and sort of moving up the corporate ladder. You can't sort of disappear. You have to be out in front. You're a CEO of one person company. You are the face. And so it's very much critical that you drive value every single day and you focus on that. But you're right. It's something that I think again, back to sort of governments and how we structure our society, we need to be mindful of that. We need to protect against the worst and celebrate and empower for the best. And that's really tough. I envy those that are doing the yeoman's work of trying to build what the society and work of the future looks like. Yeah. And how is that in terms of sort of personality types as well? If you're a bit of a gregarious type, you're out there, you're a people person. If you're an introvert, does this make the sort of the freelancing gig lifestyle a little bit more tricky? Is it unnatural? How does this fit with different personality types, would you say, Matthew? Yeah. So believe it or not, I am an introvert as well. So I was chronically shy as a child. In fact, all of my public speaking, podcast, things like that has been sort of immersion therapy for me to build up that muscle. But it's not my natural state. And what I have found is that for people, it's the same with sales, right? If you think about salespeople, the persona you think of is that gregarious salesperson that's an extrovert and always go out and glad handing and all of that. The most successful salespeople often are not those people. They are the maybe modestly introverted people that focus on helping and solving problems. So rather than focusing on, I'm going to go do marketing, I'm going to be all splashy and loud, you focus on solving people's problems and articulating that and helping. And it's consultative selling. So if you can do that in your freelance career, you can actually be quite successful. And I've seen a number of instances of that in our research and our interviews. So all types can participate. It's a great question, though. And that's also something that really comes out in the book, The Human Cloud, as well. This idea of adding value. It's adding impact is the thing that we're looking about. It's not sort of a role, a title.
these things. It's actually the impact and the value you can bring to the organization or to the task, which is the absolute deciding factor in all these things.
Yes, absolutely. And it's, at the end of the day, everything is about business cases and return on investment. If you're a corporation, or if you're an individual freelancer hiring other freelancer, you're a startup, it's all about, are you getting the value that you're paying for? Yes. And if you are, you're likely to do that again. You're likely to refer that individual to another person. So it's this virtuous cycle, but it all starts with that maximizing value. Yeah. And I'll add too, I've spent most of my career around artificial intelligence, and it's been a wild ride, because back in 25 years ago when I started, we were hand rolling all of our algorithms. We were writing everything from scratch. It was lots of fun, but incredibly expensive to do, time consuming. Only the most, the largest companies could afford it. And now, 25 years later, you can literally pick up the same algorithms we were writing off the shelf and have it running in a matter of hours. And you benefit from all that. So we're seeing this increasing march, as you would expect, of AI starting to integrate into more of what we do, take on more of the basic tasks that we might have done 10, 20 years ago. So back to that point, you've got to keep stepping up your value and keep stepping up what value you're bringing to the world. And that is going to change over time, and that's okay. The challenge is it's going much quicker than it was a century ago. So a century ago, you could sort of milk it along for a decade or two, but now it's every couple of years, your world and your life and your work is changing.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting point that you get onto there, Matthew, in terms of, you do your education, whether it's leaving high school, whether it's a PhD, but this lifelong learning and actually keeping yourself relevant, keeping yourself fresh, and actually the responsibility on the individual to be able to always testing new things and staying relevant, because you can become obsolete very, very quickly. And that's not going to slow down in the future the way it looks.
No, it is not. And that's the biggest advice. People ask, should I go into technology? Should I be a software developer? Like, what should I do with my career? And I said, frankly, I'm less concerned about the what and more about the how. So to your point, become a lifelong learner, learn those skills, learn how to work with technology, just enough to be dangerous, have analytical skills, understand data, right? These are the foundational skills that you'll need in any career. But otherwise, you're going to have to constantly reinvent at the pace that we're going. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah. And that's interesting. And it's also, I think, also another point that comes out of the book as well, Matthew, is the fact that, this freelancing gig economy role, it's not a substitute for working hard, doing the right thing, and actually sort of knuckling down. It's not a case that I can just kind of log out of the office, go and sit on a beach, and someone's going to pay me to do whatever. It's still a lot of hard work and a lot of constant grind involved in this.
Yes. And my co-author likes to jab at the notion of the 4-hour work week, right? Which even Tim Ferriss himself says, yes, admittedly, no, I didn't mean that so you could go sit on the beach. It's more about how you maximizing your value for the amount of effort you're putting in, so that you can do more and do something different. And that's exactly right. But there is flexibility. That's the beauty of it is, and even in my current corporate roles, I have found the way to have balance, which can be really hard to do. But the problem with project-based work, right, is there's always more to do.
Yes.
So if you try to get quote unquote caught up and done, it's same as in freelancing. If you try to get done with everything, you'll never be there. So you have to carve out that space and just say, it will wait till tomorrow. Set boundaries. We talk a bit about that as well. You need to set boundaries with your clients. And that doesn't mean that you're not responsive and that you're not, there for them and things like that. But there are limits, and we are still, back to your point about it, a grind and a race to the bottom. No, you have standards, you have a personal life, set those boundaries and respect them. And there's nothing wrong with firing a client if that client is being impossible and overly difficult, right? More than average. And it's okay. It's okay, because there'll be others. You want to work on finding the right ones that will continue to embrace and empower you and drive more work for you.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. And I think that, you've been very good in terms of sort of saying, what should you do to future-proof yourself? Because basically this is nothing that's going away. It's going to become, the speed is a moot point, but this is something that's going to take up more and more space in the world of work, and more of a viable option for individuals wherever they're based globally.
That's yes, and we talk a bit about, we call it the human cloud, but it's actually two clouds. It's the human and the machine cloud. In addition to the other megatrend that we haven't talked much about yet, but there's all of these people coming into the economy that are doing this kind of high value freelance work. Couple that with a number of algorithms and tools, software, et cetera, that's coming onto the market that does tasks that people used to do, right? So you're seeing this a bit of a competition. What we talk about is again, from that value maximizing perspective, if you can be the conductor, be the orchestrator that's assembling all of these pieces, and that can be both human and computer, and sort of marshaling those, you can create more value than if you had to do everything yourself. We use the example of a journalist, right? The fear is AI is going to replace the journalist. The computer is going to write all of our newspapers and our social media for us, et cetera, et cetera. No, what we're finding in practice is that, and we have a nice little diagram around it. You have the journalist is the orchestrator. They're sending out queries or tasks for doing research and doing some fact finding, drafting, reviewing, all of these different tasks. They're interspersing their skills in between there, as well as working with this, ecosystem of people and computers. And then the output is a very nice, published piece of work. That won't go away anytime soon, right? I think people have an unrealistic expectation of AI based on media and entertainment. It's not that sophisticated. And we are decades and decades away from having anything remotely sophisticated enough to truly replicate a human. But computers are really good at replicating a piece of what we do. Yeah.
And I think this is a great point that you raised there as well, is the fact that this complementarity, it's not a zero-sum game that basically machines do one thing, therefore we've got no role. But if you need to put yourself in a position as an individual where you're in a role that is something that is complementary to machines, technology, as opposed to competing with it, because, in the short, medium, and definitely in the long term, you're probably going to lose out.
Yes. And I think there's a bit of a moat or a barrier that people have put up, particularly, white collar professionals. They say, oh no, what we do is very cerebral. It cannot be replicated by computers. We're protected. And the reality is, from what we're seeing, right, pieces of what even high functioning professionals do, doctors, lawyers, scientists, software developers, designers, not everything, but pieces of it can largely be automated by systems, particularly the routinized. There's a lot more routinized work, even in professional settings, than I think we in professional settings care to admit. It's okay, right? It's okay. That's the path that technology will bring. We just have to adapt to it, and we have to understand what's the value, what's that strategic or sort of what's that higher level gestalt kind of thinking that we can layer on top of all the pieces that we're bringing together.
And what's kind of the advice you'd give to corporations, Matthew? What do they need to be doing to get the most out of the freelance, the human cloud, for the future?
Yeah, it's a couple things. From a centralized sort of governance perspective, right? I'm not suggesting. After all, I work with law firms and corporate legal departments. I wouldn't advise just letting off all the reins and say go hire anyone you want whenever you want. That would be a recipe for disaster. There has to be constraints around that from a security, privacy. You don't want to hire someone that ends up walking away with the company's trade secrets, for instance. So those checks have to be in place. But I would say they need to be simpler. They need to be streamlined and quicker, because the real risk is someone feels like they're hitting up against bureaucracy, that corporate drag, and they're just like, okay, never mind. I'm just going to go out on Upwork. I'm going to use my corporate card. I'm going to hire someone, and it totally circumvents the system. There's a term in IT called shadow IT, which means another department buys and installs software without the IT department knowing about it. I think we already are seeing shadow freelancing, where freelancers are hired outside of the wherewithal of the rest of the organization. So that's on the structural side. I think on the on the manager's side, the people that are doing the work, understanding how to engage freelancers effectively is important. You have to communicate clearly. You have to set structure. It's no different. These are highly skilled professionals, but they still need guidance. They need that structure. You need to provide that for them.
Exactly.
It's like managing any other project. And so, I implore employer managers to develop those kind of soft skills, the communication, project management, time management. It's universal, whether you're staffing with employees or staffing with freelancers.
Excellent. Well, that's great advice for companies and also for individuals there, Matthew. I really appreciate your time, insights built on experience. And I think sort of the takeaway is actually lifelong learning, being able to get involved with what you're doing and keep yourself constantly updated. I think these are great elements there, and look forward to speaking to you again soon as well on these topics.
Well, thank you so much, Glenn. It was a pleasure. Really appreciate you having me on the show.
Pleasure.